Kelly and Kim, are you guys still with us?
Yes, we are.
Yep.
Okay,
Still here.
great. Perfect, perfect. So neither of you are going to have in front of you the first document that we're going to discuss, which is the draft RFP for consulting services for the superintendent search. The committee that was assigned.
I'm sorry,
Yes.
Carrie, would you like me to email it to Kelly? I have the electronic version.
That would be great. There are a couple of just minor modifications that I made just to tighten it a little bit, but they don't change intent. So yes, you're welcome to forward that to Kelly. Thank you, Kim.
Certainly.
So wanted to just thank Jenna and Kim for the time spent on helping us to really sort of craft an RFP that is built off of not only the work that Des Moines did back in 2012, but also a number of other district templates that we received that really helped to inform some of the content. So Houston, San Antonio, Boston, St. Paul, Dallas, maybe one or two others. So we really attempted to sort of beg, borrow, and steal good content from other districts that we thought would be appropriate for inclusion in our proposal. So tonight, what we'd like to do is at a 30,000 foot level, sort of walk through this document with you, get any additional feedback, because our goal is to really have this buttoned up and ready to get out on the streets probably within the week. So the background is really intended to provide a high-level overview of Des Moines Public Schools, who we are, provide a little bit of information not only about our district as an employer, but our district in terms of the kinds and types of services that we provide, the kinds of students we serve, and really the educational programming that is delivered by DMPS. We also thought that it was, yes.
I'm sorry to interrupt you. I'm curious. We have 4 coaches on the line, and I believe that the RFP process is not going to require coach assistance, whereas our other topic for our work session will. Is there any way that we can flip-flop these two so that?
Absolutely.
Okay.
Absolutely. We can go with the engagement process first and close out with the RFP. Not a problem.
Thank you so much.
I wasn't aware of that. Thank you. So I guess I'll turn it over to Jackie and the coaches for review of the public engagement and outreach process that's being suggested for our consideration.
So I think just a little clarification, Kelly. I mean, we want to present the feedback summary and then the board recommendation for public outreach and public engagement. That's something that Maria, Kelly, and I have led with some feedback from AJ. And then we also need to review the script. The script is actually what would be followed at the meetings. Kelly, do you want to, it might be jumping ahead, but do we want to just do the script, or do the coaches want to stay on for everything? I'm not sure of their time commitment.
I think, when I would say the script, I mean, I know that, sorry, I'm trying to turn my phone off.
Okay, so if that's,
yeah, I would say start with the script.
Okay, then we'll just frame that. AJ, is that what you'd like to do?
That works for me.
Okay. So maybe we'll just frame it so everybody just has a high level how we're thinking about the process. So obviously, a huge part of what we're going to talk about today is the feedback that everybody provided and the recommendation that the committee is putting forth for discussion around public engagement and public outreach. And ideally, we'll leave here with clear next steps and action items. But one of the things that is really important is the script that you follow when you engage the community. And ideally, it's the same script each time. And so AJ put forth a outline for the script, and then Kelly kind of took over working with AJ and got some feedback from the committee. So Kelly, maybe I'll turn it over to you and AJ for this part of the conversation and talk about how the script informs the survey too.
So actually I'm gonna, if I could, we have AJ who is on, but we also have Cindy and Ben and Rodney who are with us. And so Cindy and Ben and Rodney are going to walk us through the script. And so really, I could give you a little bit of background here. So the board gave all of, if you recall, there was assignment 3 that AJ sent to us that asked us some questions, and we gave our feedback back to AJ, and he presented just a rough outline with possible like questions that we, just scenarios questions. I wouldn't say that it wasn't scripted questions necessarily, but from that document is what the committee went back with AJ and said, here are just some recommendations we would have, and then we were able to get a draft script. So I really kind of want to turn it over to our coaches to walk us through this draft script. And then for us to really use this time as dialogue to identify what changes we would like to see within that script.
Good evening. Do you all have a copy of the draft script in front of you?
Jackie, was everyone able to get a copy of the draft script?
No. So I'm not sure where the disconnect was, but does everybody here has their computers?
Yeah, I'm gonna
So,
pull it up.
AJ sent out, does anybody have the email that we hold? Yep, it's the Google Doc. So it was sent 10/12 on 10/12 from 9:58. And if you click on the link, that will give you the most recent script. So Kelly, I think everybody is in process. Everybody's got it or is in process. So you can go ahead. Yep.
So essentially, the script is broken into 6 parts: the opening and the closing, and then 4 questions.
AJ, can you speak up just a tad? We can barely hear you.
Yeah, I apologize for that. The script is broken into 4 sections: opening and closing, and 4 questions. The 4 questions obviously are the most important aspect of the script. Essentially, what they're trying to do is accomplish a few things at once. If you all look at the feedback that you all provided, there's actually a lot of things that you all were wanting the script to be able to do. And at a certain point, I just wasn't able to fit it all in. But the major things it's trying to accomplish is it's trying to straddle the line of educating / informing your community about the role of the board, the role of the superintendent, as well as trying to then get feedback based on having provided that training and insight. And so for that reason, a lot of the opening of each question is really spent trying to help people understand what is superintendent work, what is board work, and to actually have people give examples of things that you'd want a superintendent to do that is board work, or examples of things that you'd want the board to be paying attention to in a superintendent, since superintendent selection is clearly board work. In addition, the last 2 goals are really, the last 2 questions are really about the goals and the guardrails. And the third question really invites people to reflect on not only here are the goals that we've adopted as a board, but given that, what does a superintendent really need to be able to do? Like, what are the things that should absolutely be part of our screening process as a board? Because these are the goals we've set. And then similarly, the 4th question looks like guardrails. It offers folks a glimpse of the guardrails. And asks the questions, what are the things that should absolutely disqualify someone from being the superintendent? What are things that, if this was true of them, we should absolutely not consider them as a candidate? Or if this is not true of them, we should absolutely not consider them as a candidate. Now, this is because it's a complex script. That means it's going to take a lot of sophistication on the part of you all, as a board, to be able to walk people through that. You all understand this stuff. You all are more than competent to do so. But this is not a ask a question, get an answer, ask a question, get an answer script. This is we're going to be in dialogue with you about what is really effective superintendents look like, what do really effective boards look like. And that makes this a tougher script. That being said, if you all are open to taking on that challenge, I think you'll leave those sessions not only with the information you need to help make conduct a superintendent search, but you'll also leave there having meaningfully provided information to your community that they'll need to best know how to advocate for their children going forward. Do you all have the script handy at this point?
Yes.
Yes.
Then probably one other significant thing to look at is at the top of the script. It starts with welcome and gratitude, of course. But you'll notice on the left-hand column, there are times. Now, some of these sections are identified as optional, because one of the things to further complicate this already complicated script, one of the things that you all wanted was a script that could be modified to be very, very brief in places where you're doing outreach and they didn't give you a lot of time on the agenda, or more extensive in places where you all are doing engagement, inviting people to your meeting, and you have more time. And so you'll notice that these sections are identified as optional, but when you opt out of these sections, it also indicates that you have an obligation to provide additional information to folks so that they do get the same information other people in longer sessions get. They'll just get it in the form of a document rather than talking through it with you all during the outreach and engagement session. That theme carries on down in the 4 questions. You'll notice for each question, there's a 5-minute version and a 20-minute version. And that 20-minute version could easily be 30 minutes. I mean, you all can decide how long you want it to be, but I think at minimum, you're going to need at least 20 minutes to get through each question, depending on the size of the audience. And so again, with the 5-minute version, if you choose that, there are documents that you're going to need to provide to folks so that they, again, have the exact same information that people who attended the 20-minute version. So those are the big pieces of this and why it's structured the way it is.
AJ, you're breaking up.
AJ? Yeah, I think you're frozen.
While we're waiting for him to come back, I think Kelly, Marie, and I can just summarize some of the initial feedback, because I think that would be helpful to hear the initial feedback that was given to AJ. I think, Maria, if I were summarizing, there was a lot around simplicity of language, accessibility of language to make sure that there are questions that people can connect and engage with. That was one of the pieces of feedback. Kelly, were there other pieces of feedback that we gave to AJ at the high level?
Sorry, it's just no, I felt like those were the major themes, like making sure that our community really understood the questions as we were asking them, and could engage in a meaningful conversation.
Yeah, that's the biggest challenge, because this is very much kind of the most intricate script I've ever developed for a board. I think one of the questions you have to decide is, do you all really want to accomplish all the things that you mentioned in your feedback? So I tried to customize this to what you all said you wanted. However, if seeing it, you all want to pare back your ambitions, this would be the time to reach that consensus. Or if you feel like it is important to both educate and listen during the sessions, then it may just be a matter of modifying this to be more effective with that intention.
This is Terry, AJ, and I appreciate the time and attention you have given to all of our comments. And I'm not for sure when I provided all of that feedback that the expectation was that every single thing that I suggested would somehow be embedded into a script. I thought that maybe we might utilize those as a way to then prioritize those things that we thought were important. So, that having been said, and also recognizing the value of time, not only for our board, but for our participants. After looking at this, I feel like I always want to defer to the 5-minute version. To me, that's sort of the highest order priority of all of the things that likely we have submitted, and that's likely why you selected it. But it feels like less is more, number one. And number two, when we take into consideration Maria's comments with regard to our ability to easily translate and to contextualize the information, recognizing that it's going to happen across multiple languages, it feels like we really need to be thoughtful about how deep and how wide we go and what the most critical information we want to get from individuals is in this process, and synthesize our script to be exactly that.
So based on that, if people agree, I'm just wondering if AJ, you really have 5 buckets, right? In essence, as you put this together, goals, guardrails, superintendent work, board work. Is there an area that people could lean into and say, well, this is less important for the purposes of this conversation? Is that how you'd approach this, AJ, or do you want to summarize the prioritization of feedback?
I think the decision point for you all this evening is to decide what you want to accomplish with the script. Should there be an educational portion as well as a listening portion? I think that's one key decision point. And then I think the other key decision point is, are these the topics that you want? So for example, I could imagine a scenario where you say, if I was going to recommend just one question, I'd scrap 1, 2, and 3 and just do question 4, for example. I think question 4 is the one that is most designed to get you actionable information for a search. Questions 1, 2, and 3 help with that. But if I was ranking them in terms of which one best gets you actionable information for search purposes, it'd be question 4. And so I think those are the 2 questions that I'd encourage you all to wrestle with. Is one, what is the intention that we want to fulfill in this? Should there be an educational portion, or should it just be asking questions and writing down responses? Or and are all 4 of these questions you want, or is there a subset of these questions that would be sufficient to ask?
Could we potentially provide information prior to the session? So some of that training material per se, whether it be in written documentation or videos that would help prepare a person for this conversation? Is that something that you see other
Yes.
districts doing?
Yeah, you can absolutely do that. I wouldn't actually change the script, though. You can't really design the script on the assumption that people have actually done the pre-work. And so, yes, I think you can offer pre-work. So for folks who, are inclined to do so and feel drawn to it, there are going to be some people who want to be this involved in the process and some people who want to be this involved. And so providing tools for people who want to be in this involved is absolutely recommended. I would design your script for this group, not for this group.
I'm leaning in agreement with Terry's comments before, and would rather go in the direction of simplifying our script and doing the training, moving the training materials into another format.
AJ, I want to make sure I'm clear. So you said if we were to cut to the chase, you would recommend question 4, which is guardrails, which really goes to the exclusionary criteria.
Yes, ma'am.
it feels a little counterintuitive to start with the things we don't want. And especially with an audience that, you know, likely has some ideas about the things they do want. Maybe there are two questions, and the two questions really are, you know, what are those criteria? I'm just trying to scroll back up to where that
Essentially-
question is.
Essentially, you're thinking of question 2 and question 4.
Right. Yes. Question 2 and 4. And that feels like it gives people the opportunity to share the attributes that they would be looking for in an individual, and also those things that we should consider not acceptable in an individual. And that feels a little easier to parse than, you know, 5 questions that go so deep and so wide that it just becomes more difficult for us to manage through, especially with the audience that I anticipate we'll have at our engagement sessions. I don't know how others feel, but just want to put that out there.
No, I agree with what you're saying, Terry. I'm even having a hard time thinking how I would answer number 4. I mean, I don't know that I make the connection between guardrails and those, when I say those 4 guardrails, how that then translates into exclusionary criteria for superintendent. If anyone can see how that conversation rolls, I'd love to hear it, but I can't make that jump in my head.
Well, it actually feels like it might be helpful, especially as a starter for people who've likely not participated in these kinds of processes, to even feel confident that we can share some examples. These are the kinds of things that we're looking for in this question, and prompt them a little bit to sort of get their thinking going.
So I intentionally didn't do that. Obviously, you all can. I generally recommend against it. I try to encourage boards not to unintentionally anchor community members. And so when you give examples, a lot of your feedback is probably going to echo the examples that you give, because you'll give good examples and they'll make sense and be like, yeah, that's certainly what we want or don't want. Instead, what the script suggests is asking people to offer an example. Who will give an example, of something that we want in a superintendent? Who will give an example of something that we don't want in a superintendent? And let people kind of talk it out among themselves, but never hear from the authority figure what a good or right answer sounds like. Obviously, you all can do that because that is a viable strategy for helping people connect with the material. But it does have cost in that you often tend to unintentionally anchor your community comments.
So if I were to summarize where I think maybe we are, is that if we were to narrow the focus and just focus on 2 and 4 as an example, and kind of drop, I think, the focus on education, what the board does, I think we're going to drop. We wouldn't do the board education piece in this scenario. And the line for some community members of understanding superintendent versus board is maybe less important for the conversation. They're answering the question as if, like, what do you want in a leader? Right. So if you take that education out of the way, then you just have those 2 questions. I think to your point, one of the things that we couldn't come up with we were trying to talk about a job interview or something like something that somebody could connect with. Most people can connect with a job interview or some type of something like that. I don't know if that sparks anybody's, how do we make a better connection with the community, that speaks in less technical speak.
Well, but don't you feel like that's what we're asking them questions so they can help us come up with the job description, or the job description, right? Like, what are we looking for? I mean, so that, am I missing what you're talking about?
No, I think we're just, so the The second piece, superintendent work, just look at the 5-minute version. Does everybody look at that and does that feel accessible? Are we feeling good about 2? And is really, how do you make 4? Does 2 feel good to people when you read those questions? Does that feel like community members can? Kim or Kelly, what do you think about 2?
I think words like collaborate may not be the best. I understand how we use collaboration, but support, engage. It just feels like we have to boil this down to the lowest common denominator in ways that it's relatable to anybody who shows up that day. Anybody, educated or not, anybody who shows up. So words do matter in this regard, in my opinion.
And here's maybe what I'm trying to understand a little bit more about is maybe general framework and general outline. And so I think going back to really, Jackie, what you're trying to ask, which is, do 2 and 4 make sense to kind of go down that path? And I think we can get to words and connection with maybe using some different words that might be more translatable and relatable to folks. But is that where you're trying to go down this path, Jackie? Just make sure.
Yeah,
I just want to make
was.
sure. Okay, thank you.
Yeah, so if there's consensus with 2 and 4 and nobody's kicking and screaming that we're removing 1 and 3, then I think that's the guidance we need and we move on, unless AJ, you have
Right.
other feedback.
Nope, we can take all the feedback here and get the next version out to you all.
If I could come back and just ask the question of my board colleagues, I know that there was desire for education. Is that something that we're okay saying, nope, not really needing that right now? I mean, we're talking about superintendent role, so we are at least educating on superintendent role, guardrails. Is there anything else that's missing?
Yeah, I'm feeling like the education piece of that will end up coming later if we do some things as a board. I think the main thing that I see right now is spilling out that superintendent piece, what the role of a superintendent is, getting that feedback from the community. So I think that's the most important thing for this crowd. I think we will have other opportunities to share about board work, goals, guardrails. I think that's something that we even have in our timeline to get to. But I think for this particular point, right now it's focusing on the superintendent work. What is the superintendent? What's the role of a superintendent? And getting that feedback from the community on what they're looking for in the next superintendent.
It almost feels like at the highest level, creating, again, whether it's in video form or in an introduction at the session, I do think it's important for us to level set so that everybody understands this is what a superintendent does. Because not knowing that will not allow them to answer the questions that we've identified. So I think we have to, in the easiest way possible, identify, the 3 or 4 or 5 things that are the functional responsibility, will not use those words, of a superintendent.
Maria, one of the things we were talking about in our committee was just even use of images, right? So how can things like a simple diagram also just explain the superintendent, the board of directors? Who's the role? Yeah, something that is also a visual for people that are visual people. So I think there's some agreement that there should be something ideally in writing that could be handed out. Maybe it's a slide that could be put up as well as talked about at a high level, enough to set up the conversation. Do you
Right.
want to, Marie, you've been,
Yeah, I just felt like, I mean, for any sessions that are going to be conducted in Spanish, I know that I would need more than words. And I would need something that I can show. Not everyone knows. I can't assume that everyone in the community that will decide to participate will know what my role even is. And so I have to be able to be transparent about that. And I have to be able to create an environment where mm, um, I feel people are truly understanding in order to get meaningful feedback. And a diagram, it would help explain 1,000 things. And I think that that would eliminate a lot of confusion, lots of questions. Visuals are really important. And at least they would be in the sessions that I would help facilitate or co-facilitate.
Yeah. I've
So
provided-
if that is not something that is, commonly utilized, or if my colleagues decide that that's not an effective method to engage people, that's something that I would separately choose to do myself.
Yeah, I've provided you all previously with a diagram that tries to help describe the relationship between the community, the board, the superintendent, the organization, children, and back up again. And so I'm happy to share that diagram again because I agree that would probably be helpful. That being said, you all are now going in the exact opposite direction of what you just told me a few minutes ago. Is now you're talking about doing more education in order to tee up this conversation. So I need clear guidance. Do you want more of an educational component in the script or not?
I think the clear guidance was at a high level, there's clarity of what a superintendent does at a high level, not necessarily the specificity that was provided in this script. So at a high level, clarity around what the superintendent does, including visuals, and an understanding that the board hires the superintendent.
All right, so you do want a educational component. You just wanted a higher level that is descriptive of the interplay between the community, the board, and the superintendent. Am I understanding that correctly?
Mhm.
Hello?
Yes.
Excellent. Yeah, no, that I can deliver that very easily. No problem. Thank you for that clarity. Any other thing? So here's let me summarize and see if I listened adequately. That you want a script that definitely has a opening and closing, a script that as part of the opening has a high level overview of the role of the superintendent as it interplays with the role of the organization, the community, and the board. And then you want to dive into a question around, without any educational component, a question around what do people want in a superintendent, and then a second question about what do people not want in a superintendent. Am I understanding correctly?
Mhm. Yeah. There's nods around the table.
Excellent. Then we will go to work and get that for you and send it back specifically to the committee for their consideration, and then be able to move forward with initiating the outreach engagement work. I'm very excited for you all and the next steps that you get to take. You are really going to enjoy going out and doing intentional listening with your community. It is always something that that as public officials we tend to really benefit and grow from, is just listening directly to our community. And so excited for you all that you'll be doing that shortly. Is there anything else you need from me or the team before we transition?
AJ, if I could just ask a question. So I know that this script, our survey that will be online will mirror the script.
correct.
I assume that there will be an opportunity for us, at least survey form, to just if we wanted to collect. I know I feel like I have heard from my colleagues things like who's at those meetings. So we want just demographic information. We can easily capture that in an online version of a survey, but how is that done in person? Is that maybe like a pre-registration process? I'm just curious what maybe others have used in the past.
Yeah. So just finished doing a similar process with another district, and they had the exact same desire. They wanted opt-in demographic information for all of their in-person participants as well as their survey participants, and so they built that they made all the in-person meetings or Zoom meetings require registration where all the demographic questions were asked. Obviously, people weren't required to disclose, but they were given the opportunity to disclose. And they built those exact same questions into the survey. So at this point, your survey would have 2 content questions and then whatever series of demographic questions the committee lands on. And that does feel like a task for the committee to think through what is the information we want to ask for. I do recommend, and you'll probably want to work with either your legal or your comms team on this, but explaining that whatever standard way you all already use for explaining that this is optional information, that people don't have to give it, and that it's only going to be used to help get a sense of, did we do a good job of reaching all communities? Like, you all will need to, again, I would get with your comms or legal folks. I'm sure you have a way of communicating that already, but that language that you already use will need to be appended. Especially people need to know it is not mandatory. They don't have to give demographic information to participate in the process. The other thing I would say is, having just gone through this process, and literally we just concluded that process this past Saturday, is that the board really enjoyed being able to know how representative or non-representative the feedback was. In their case, the feedback was very representative of their city, not very representative of their district. I suspect you all are likely to find something similar. But if that's important to you to know, then as a committee, I just say identify what that is. However, when you identify what data we're collecting, I would recommend you not collect any data without also identifying what are the thresholds that the data reveals that would cause you to take additional listening steps. So basically what I'm saying is, don't collect data just to collect data. When you choose to collect data, identify upfront, if the data says X, we're going to do Y. If the data says A, we're going to do B. And if you can't figure that out on the front end, then don't bother asking people for the data. And so that is the only kind of cautionary advising I'd offer you. Is just be really clear how we're going to use this.
Great, thank you. Kelly, anything else on the script, or should we?
I don't think so. I think, yeah, just AJ and team, thank you for walking us through that.
Always a pleasure to
Great.
be of service.
And is there
You're
anything else that we need the coaches for, or can they jump off? I don't know I don't think we did have anything else because we had just the outreach that Jackie and Maria and I were going to walk through with our colleagues.
Yeah, I don't think there's anything else you need us for, but as is always
Nope.
the case, whatever you need us for, whenever you need us, don't hesitate to reach out. We're always happy to step into action on your behalf.
All right, thank you.
You all have a blessed evening.
Thank you.
You too.
Okay, so the memo that I'm going to talk through is the great work of Kelly, Maria, and I. I sent it on Saturday at 4:55, and it says board pre-read. And there's both a memo, and then there's a whole list of, like an Excel spreadsheet that gives you the data behind the summary recommendations. So at a high level, our goal is, number one, to provide you a summary of the feedback. So each of the board members were asked to give feedback. You gave that to us. We pulled it together, summarized it, and then we're putting forth a recommendation. This is not the be all end all. This is to a starting point for us to have a conversation. And you'll see that we specifically called out discussion questions along the way. So I'm going to assume that everybody read the summary, that you looked at the overarching recommendations, that you understand the top public engagement and outreach priorities. We generalize them, for instance, parents, staff, students. And then we also called out the top 5 community-based engagement locations. So imagining us going into the community, wanting to host a meeting off campus, these were the 5 most commonly suggested locations. So the first page was a summary of the recommendations. The second page is where we actually dug in and said, okay, based on everything we heard, this is what we should do. The number one thing I want to say is we received so many suggestions from everybody, and that was wonderful. All of the groups that we should engage in the process, and to make sure nobody worries about that. If they're not specifically called out, the intention is that they will be on the email list, inviting them to participate in the survey and share with other people. They will be on the invite list to encourage people to attend public meetings. And so it's really important to know that if some suggestion you gave isn't reflected, it is here. It's captured on the last page. The last page is kind of our invite list for all of the things that we're going to do. So as we were putting together, looking at the recommendations, one of the things that I want to say out loud, and I think it's really important, is tight timeline, a lot of meetings. And so I thought it was really important for us to say out loud that we're recommending 13 public meetings and 5 outreach meetings. And keep in mind that we need at least 2 board members at each thing. So just at a high level, we're going to be asking every board member to do at least 3 public engagement meetings and 2 outreach meetings between the 31st and the 5th. So October 31st and December 5th. And I say that because if we feel like that's too much, that's even really important to say now. If it feels like too much, then, and we don't think we can commit, because everybody's got to commit for the math to work. So as we go through this conversation, there'll be times at the end to say, hey, maybe we're doing too much. But otherwise, everybody's going to have the intention that they're going to block their schedule from December 31st. So from October 31st to December 5th, which would allow us then a week to pull the recommendations together and give it to the full board by the 12th.
Jackie, can I ask a question?
Yep.
So then I know the time frame, the 31st to the 5th, but what are we attending for, like, time frame? Like, are these hour conversations? Are these?
Max hour.
Okay.
And I think to AJ's point, I think what we have to do is come to some agreement. So standalone meetings, I think we'd say, let's try to have them in 45 minutes. They might run long. I think there's also the meetings that we would call, I always get them confused, so I want to get it right, the outreach meetings, where you're jumping on somebody else's pre-existing meeting and you may only get 30 minutes. So I think the trick is that we all try and follow the same script and ask the questions in the same way, but understanding that it all depends which type of meeting we're attending.
And then one more question. I'm assuming that this time would be the time frame also for surveys to go out as well. We would do that the 31st through the 5th.
Kelly, I think that's a question. That assumes we are ready for launch. And so Kelly, can you speak to that piece? I don't know if you've talked to Mary.
No, I have not had a chance to talk to Mary, but I don't know that we would anticipate that there would be a problem with launch. But again, I need to confirm with her what the system is within the district. And as we have the script, and now we know we also have to talk further about if we wanted to collect demographic information. So we just have some things to tighten up yet on what that obviously the final survey would look like, but I think that's worth discussion. I know in our small group or with Maria and Jackie, we didn't talk about how long we wanted the survey to be open, but I don't know if anybody has an idea if it's open throughout that time. Do people feel that's too long? I mean, if we're taking public input in person, I don't know that there's any concern, unless folks have it, to raise up right now of wanting to keep it open that long.
I guess I'm just wondering, maybe anyone from the district could answer the question of when you send surveys out to our families, about how long do you leave those out there for people to answer? Okay. And I'm not saying that 10 days is our magic number, but that just gives us an idea. But then also maybe thinking if we want to give people more time, I think the key is being mindful of holidays that are coming up. So wanting to make sure that if we're going to do this the 31st through the 5th, that we probably don't want to push too much into December, knowing that we might not get as much feedback. So if we could make the survey around that time, that would be my recommendation, but maybe also pushing a little bit more than 10 days as well.
Yeah, let me say two things. I was just gonna say, there is some syncing up that definitely needs to happen with Phil and Rosie and the team, and when we notify people about public meetings. So we definitely need a timeline discussion. I'll just call that out because that hasn't happened because we need district support. The second thing, and this is really a question for Kelly, is I think the only thing that's really important is however, Dr. Grinstead is going to tabulate the survey results, we just need it in digestible form by on or around December 5th, right, Kelly? So we can compile the
Right.
summary report.
Yep. So I'll confirm that of just that time length that's needed, time frame needed.
I believe that the survey should be open from our first public meeting until our last public meeting, because if people were to show up late or to need to leave early, then giving them a QR code or a sheet with a link on it so that they can complete if they're not able to fully participate in the in-person setting, I think is really important. And the other thing, I don't know if we should be relying on our staff to be compiling these data. Typically, the coaches would do that on our behalf. So I don't know that Mary and her team need to do that. I would recommend checking with AJ. I know that from my coaching experience, we compile it for districts.
That's a great point, Kim. And I wonder if that just helps keep it just outside of the district and that with our coaches, so that that just makes a lot more sense. And so it should probably just a matter of how those files get transferred and that information gets sent to our coaches to be able to review.
So Kim, just so I'm clear, DMPS is still sending out the survey and using their existing infrastructure. It's that the coaches are going to collect, digest, and give it back to us.
I'm going to recommend that you touch base with AJ. With other school boards that I work with, we create the survey. And when I say we, the council of the Great City Schools creates the survey link. The school board, we would determine how that gets disseminated, whether along with the comms department. But ultimately, the owner of the survey is with the coaches, so that there isn't going to be any lag time in compiling. In fact, the compiling can be done on a regular basis. They would have all of that information, but I would recommend touching base with AJ.
So Kim, this is Terry. So I just want to confirm. So the only function that the district would provide is dissemination of the survey through existing channels or means that we have, but anything else associated with the survey would be a function of the coaches.
That's correct.
Thank you.
So Kelly, I think the next step is to ask AJ if he can follow the timeline and to discuss that with him.
Yep, and I
So-
will have that conversation with he and the team.
I just want to echo, I agree with Kim's statement. I think it should be open the entire time, that we should have it to refer back to. And I like the idea, going back to AJ's comment, if we're collecting data, let's be using it along the way to make sure that if there are voices we haven't heard, we are recognizing that early and able to gather it intentionally. So thank you for that suggestion. I agree.
Okay, so with that, I'm just going to pull us back so we can quickly go through the high level recommendation, because I think this was helpful just to understand how the survey interplays. So the recommendation that we came together, we heard everything from all high schools, every director district, then we heard some middle schools, some feeder schools, we basically heard everything. So the first section is recommending 7 all community meetings. All community is defined by just anybody can come. And Kelly identified, she kind of looked at geography and discussed with Maria, 2 elementary schools, Hubble and Monroe, 2 middle schools, Harding and Brody, 1 high school east, a virtual meeting, and hosting a Spanish room at one of the events. So just Spanish only in one of the rooms. If we have additional staff and translators, Maria's meeting with the BFLs. Thank you, the interpreters. I keep doing that. I appreciate you correcting me. Then we may be able to add that service. So we could have more Spanish only rooms and identify other languages that we might be able to offer. But yeah.
Can
Can you clarify virtual? Is that the virtual high school, or is that just virtual open to anyone, any
Open to
student and
everybody,
parent?
anybody. So
Okay, so
this
general
first
community.
group, right? So this first group would be all community. And yep, the locations are just moving throughout the district. And look, there were lots of questions around language accommodations, discussion about interpretation services. So I think where we are with that is wanting to hear feedback from you, but also knowing that Maria is going to be engaging the BFLs to ask for their feedback and advice and availability as well.
Can you help me understand the benefits of a Spanish only environment?
You want to speak?
I'm not able to hear anyone
Kim.
if someone is.
Can you hear me?
Yes.
Kim, can you hear me? Repeat your question, please.
I'm just curious about the Spanish only environments. Can you help me understand the benefits to offering that?
Yes. I think that if we can provide a space without having to have the need for interpretation, you save a lot of time and have much better clear information. So essentially, we would be doing the same thing that we would do with monolingual English speaking individuals.
My only concern there is that it's a requirement that we have 2 board members in every space. And so
Correct.
interpretation would be needed for at least one person in the room. If, for example, if you and I were to team up, I would
Mhm.
need interpretation services.
Right. And that would not be an issue, because then we would just have someone interpreting for one person rather than for a room full of people.
So I'm just going to make a suggestion on this one, and maybe as we go all the way through, if we go back to overarching recommendations in our summary, one of the things we heard a lot was either Spanish only, multilingual opportunities, use BFLs, outreach tactics should mirror student population. And I think part of the recommendation for a Spanish only room was to better achieve that goal.
Right.
I,
And if I can just comment, Kim, it would be like there are, like I think of court interpreters. There is actually equipment that you can utilize if you have your if you need interpretation services. So in this case, the board member who does not speak Spanish would be the minority. But we would accommodate, we would have appropriate accommodations for that board member to be inclusive.
Yes. Um,
Does that make sense?
it does, yes.
Okay.
Kim, is your, just so I'm clear, I think your concern is actually just around capacity, just ability to execute all of these. Is that where you were?
Not necessarily. I was
Okay.
just wanting to better understand if, just, I'm not as familiar with the benefits that would come from having a Spanish only room. If there's something additional that I'm not thinking of, I'm just inquiring. It does, the languages that are spoken in our district go much further beyond just Spanish. So I do have some thoughts about, if we're going to be holding, having interpretation services available, are we just talking Spanish?
Yeah, I think what I would do, just so we don't, so we move through this a little bit quicker, I think if we could get some overarching feedback, the BFL meeting is going to be very important. They're a critical piece to this, and Interim Superintendent Smith was great in helping us access the BFLs. Maria's meeting with them. We definitely believe that interpretation services should be available. I think we have to be planful around it to the best of our ability. So I think that needs just a little bit more work. But so there's BFLs helping us with interpretation services. And then there's this idea of a Spanish only room at one of the locations. Are there any other things within language that we want to elevate at this point? Otherwise, there's a few other questions we want to get through. We're just trying to get some general feedback from the group.
I just had a general comment, and I think I understand the necessity for sort of the Spanish room so that it's concentrated. And that would be where anyone who speaks Spanish would be assigned to participate in the session. One thing that I have come to learn over time is that if we don't replicate what we're attempting to do with the Spanish room for other languages, you end up doing multiple interpretations at the same time, which for a lot of folks is, number one, not effective, but also is horribly time consuming. So being thoughtful about how we adapt to languages, or maybe in the context of certain sessions, we indicate that this session is identified specifically for individuals who speak this language. It feels like, based on my experience, that is the most effective. And also it allows you to expedite what needs to happen with that specific language group.
And I think something to consider as we go through this recommendation, we've also identified organizations where we're going to host meetings in the community. And so, for instance, Embark is a great example where we would definitely put the asterisks there. And the assumption is that whether the meeting is in Burmese and English, or it's just in Burmese. So I think as we go through this recommendation, also figuring out how these community organizations might fill a role in a way that that we haven't gotten to yet.
Yeah, and I just want to call out, I mean, 30% of our student enrollment identifies Hispanic, and I think it really shows that we are committed to all voices and 30% of our population. I think coming to the table and offering this really just demonstrates our commitment to, inclusivity, wanting to hear, wanting to listen, wanting to learn. And I also agree about other languages as well. I think we need to give ourselves the flexibility or be thoughtful if we're seeing there are, a lot of families or individuals that want to share within a certain other language that we're meeting families where they are, right? And so I think this is a great first step in just us showing that we're going to create a safe space and we're going to hear you and we're going to listen to you. I think it's a great step forward for us as a district and a board.
Thanks. So a lot of things to work out on that, but I feel like, is everybody, any other comments on that? We also just want to get a couple of kind of quick pieces of feedback around timing. The typical thing would be to do it right after work. We also identified doing something on a Saturday maybe or a Sunday to get feedback. We could do one during the day. Some parents actually have more flexibility during the day than they do after school. Does anybody have any opinions that they want to share about when we would offer these meetings?
Are we going to have childcare? Have we talked about that at all?
It's really going to be up to the district.
Or
I think,
families,
to
our
sup-
kids
to
are
support.
welcome?
Yeah, definitely a family-friendly culture. I think we'll have refreshments there. I think this really, speaks a little bit, and this is probably directed at you, Terry, and Chair Bradley, the resources that we have at our disposal to get the child care, whether it's dollars or staff.
I think in my mind, I just think of meetings as just everybody comes. I mean, I think we'll see what we can do and what resources we have, but we are a family-friendly district. And so I think we can still get the work done if people are bringing their littles. It will be telling to see who comes. I mean, knowing that I've been a part of a process, not this particular process before, not that many people were bringing their kids with them, not that that won't happen this time. I'm not saying that, but I think we can be able to look at what our options are for that. So I'm not saying that it's a no, it won't happen, but I think we'll look at our options for that and the resources we have to be able to do that.
Could we provide childcare at the
Community conversation?
Yeah.
Yes.
I wonder how much it was used.
But I think that that's something hopefully that can be discussed as we move forward. So there's the meeting with the BFLs next week. And hopefully that's something that I can mention and see how normally that takes place when they hold meetings for parents.
So first section, I think, was all community meetings. And as we're going through this, I think one of the questions you should be thinking about is, are we doing too many community meetings, right? And should we segment more and be more targeted? So you can think about that. If you have any questions about location, Kelly, do you want to say anything about how you chose the locations?
Are you talking the school building locations?
Yep. Yes.
Okay. Oh, now I'm trying to remember. How did I choose those? You know what? I ended up because of, for at least looking at the elementary schools, we have, going to all the director districts. So that was really important. In District 1, we have 2 high schools. So I thought, let's pick 2 elementary schools. Hubble, I thought was pretty centrally located. Monroe, I felt like had a really good diversity with families there. Middle schools, looking at districts. Let me see who's that? That would be 2 and 4. Am I getting that right? So feeder pattern for Harding that feeds into the North High School, and then Brody for Lincoln High School, and then East High School was one we chose. And I think I was trying to remember, and maybe somebody correct me if I'm wrong. I was trying to figure out where we had higher populations of, like, what were our largest classes? Which were our largest schools? I guess I don't even know that.
So I think
that-
if people have, I was just going to say, just so we can keep it moving, if people have specific comments about the school selected, could you just ping?
Mhm.
Is that okay?
Yeah.
Okay, great.
You just ask for a little input on the time, and I just think as long as we have a variety of time, I think
great.
that's perfect.
Perfect. Thank you.
I would just also consider capacity in all these buildings of where are you going to have it and how many people does it accommodate and thinking about who may come in those areas.
Great. Thank you. So next thing we did was we listened to the generalizations, right? So we heard some very specific groups of people that we wanted to get feedback. One was making sure student voice was included, staff, and DMPS community partners. Those three popped very loud. They sounded a little bit different. Somebody might have put for students YLI or El Éxito or student councils, or for staff, they might have said all staff, or they may have said teachers of the year or ISEA or AFSCME or trades. And then for DMPS community partners, it was, everybody was talking about the formal partnerships that DMPS had. So we made recommendations to say that all of these meetings, we should do 3 targeted meetings. For the students, you know, we went back and forth. Should we do it at Central Campus because it's centrally located? Could we go into classrooms in all of the districts and just do it during the day in a high school classroom? Could we do a breakfast? We talked about virtual for all of these, and honestly, where we started was it shows respect to do in-person meetings, especially for the staff one, which is why we were not recommending virtual. But just want to get feedback from people on, do you think these are the right segments for targeted meetings? Do you have any feedback about what we're proposing? Because we're looking for guidance on student meeting, staff meeting, and the community partners meeting. Matt has told us that there's a monthly meeting that Vanessa Howell leads. So
Mhm.
ideally, we could just work into that existing meeting. So
Yeah.
that would be our goal for that one.
Yep, I think these targeted meetings look good. The student staff and the DMPS community partners. I know that when we did our kind of getting our goals feedback, we went into the high schools and did a conversation at each high school. I think it would be beneficial to probably take that same approach. That would be my suggestion, is going into each high school during the day. I think it's very important to come to them during the day and not expect them to come to us in the evening or on the weekends. So I think we really need to be mindful of that. As far as the staff meeting is concerned, I think having those in person, I think we might want to consider having some things virtual. It may not be a whole bunch of meetings, but I think we need to give people that option. It's probably some trepidation about being in person with people. It's flu season, it's still COVID season. So I think we need to be mindful of offering a virtual option for people to have that as well.
Just to be clear, you mean for staff, because we have a virtual all community option.
For staff.
Okay,
Yeah,
perfect.
I would say for staff, and you might want to consider it for DMPS community partners, maybe all 3 of them. I just think that, this time of year, sickness is all around. People may not want to come out and be in person, especially if we're drawing large crowds of people, they may not choose to come. So it's an option. I know we also have the surveys that will go out as well, but that just might be something to think about.
So I think, and we're going to come back to this at the end, and this is not a critique of you, Duana, but technically we just added 5 meetings. So we'll have to come back at the end and decide how we want to prioritize. And I think it's helpful because it helps us look at the all community meetings and decide if we want to do all of those all community meetings. Any other feedback on the student meeting? So just to recap, what I heard is let's try and hit every high school during the day. For staff meeting, I heard 1 in person, 1 virtual. For DMPS community partners, ideally we'll just work into their existing meeting, whether it's virtual or in person. So the next part of this was, yes, thanks.
So am I to assume, or maybe I shouldn't assume anything here, but will all students, all staff, and all community partners also have access to the survey? Okay.
Yep.
I think that helps us in prioritizing how we go about creating opportunities for engagement, especially with these three groups.
So then the next place we went was to organization hosted meetings. So in essence, we said, and Maria, Kelly, and I were brainstorming, where can we go in the community and host a meeting that feels more comfortable and that we may increase turnout. And what we heard from all of you were Homes of Oak Ridge. We heard CFUM, Urban Dreams, or Creative Visions. There was just, we could probably pick which one we think is the best. We heard Embark, we heard Boys and Girls Club, we think at Drake, so we want feedback on that. We also heard El Éxito, but as we talked to Maria, what I think was the clarity was that Conmigo, the Early Education Center, is a better physical location to congregate people, of which El Éxito would be a referring partner, right? They tell people about the meeting. So we took the liberty of making that suggested change. So this would, in this scenario, we would propose asking these 5 entities to host meeting space. We would advertise it to the community. We would ask them to advertise it as well. But, and technically they're open to all community members, just a different location in the community. Any questions around this? Same structure, same format, ideally 45 minutes. Just out of curiosity, just because, do any of you know if these spaces actually have physical locations? Like, I don't know that Urban Dreams does in its current state, does it? It does? Does anybody have a recommendation of the CFUM, Urban Dreams, Creative Visions? Okay.
It feels like, oh, I'm sorry. I was going to say, it feels like Urban Dreams has a larger sort of presence and convenes a lot of things anyway, so might be a natural for this. I think CFUM still struggles a little bit. And I think Creative Visions, this just sort of isn't their thing, but I'm sure they would refer.
Yeah, and I'm sure they would work collaboratively on something as well.
I was also going to recommend, what about the Boys and Girls Club at McCombs?
So I want to call out that Boys and Girls Clubs were the universal term. At Drake was a question mark. So if somebody has a better recommendation, and it sounds like you do.
Well, it feels like when I look at these, like, even though Conmingo is sort of near South Side, Boys and Girls Club at McCombs is truly South Side.
Good. Okay.
So
Great feedback. So again, these are, I should say 5 organization hosted meetings that we're recommending. So in the definition, and I'm going to let Kelly, because she's always good at grounding us in what is community engagement and what is community outreach. Kelly, do you want to just frame that again before we move into the next part of the conversation?
Yeah, so outreach would be where we are going out into the community. So they have, we're going out to them, they have something scheduled. We're part of that process with them, and engagement is where we're bringing people in. And so where we're bringing them in, like to our buildings, or we're bringing them into a community host site, but we are organizing and we are the hosts of that meeting.
Yeah, and there's, you'll notice there's a little bit of gray area, but we try to really listen to the feedback from AJ and the coaches around identifying the differences between the two. So we'll take you through the last part of this, and then we're going to have to probably come back with some priorities. The last part is called targeted engagement or outreach meetings. We felt like, in addition to the groups that we have talked about, we heard a consensus to get feedback from parents with kids with special needs, business, faith community, neighborhood associations, and parents. What we did here was list the specific ideas that were suggested by participants. So for instance, parents with kids with special needs, some board members had suggested Heartland AEA, Decoding Dyslexia, Ask Resource Center. So that would be an example where we would look at that, and ideally 2 board members would say, yes, either I know of a meeting, or I'm happy to call Heartland and ask them to work with us on this. But really, these 5 in bold, they were the consensus communities that board members wanted to hear from. Is that clear? And so it could, like, for instance, for the faith community, we heard everything from St. Anthony's Catholic Church to Corinthian Baptist Church to FFY Ministries. It can look lots of different ways, but it is saying out loud, we want to hear from the faith community and get some feedback.
I would also suggest adding more the non-traditional faith community, Muslim community, you know, those sorts of, that sort of outreach to me also gets to other non-English speaking as well. So
I think where we're going to need, where did we put a little bit different, but the ECDOs as well, the ethnic community-based organizations. I think I'm going to use that as an example, Terry. So I'm going to add next to faith community, Muslim community. What happens now is after we generally agree that these are kind of the 5 priorities, it's board members actually stepping up and signing up to do the outreach. So I think it's a great suggestion as long as somebody signs up and has a contact or is willing to do the work to navigate into that community.
I think there are going to be times as well when, based on the language specificity that you are utilizing for engagement or outreach, you automatically will probably get to some of those non-traditional faith communities as well.
So at this point, I feel like what we've given you is our best thinking. Along the way, some of you have given feedback, but let's open it up for additional questions. And then we probably need to spend just a little bit more time doing some reprioritizing, unless people think we just want to add more.
I really think that for the business community in particular, we should survey them.
Okay.
I don't know that having a meeting, I mean, it's going to be hard to convene a lot of those folks, and I think we might get more feedback just by surveying. And so, you know, being thoughtful about where the survey is the best instrument to gather the feedback versus engagement. I think for some of our non-English speaking, absolutely engagement and outreach is where we're going to, you know, get the most bang for our buck. But there are other populations that are very comfortable and probably would prefer a survey as opposed to some sort of meeting.
So when, just using that as a jumping off point, when you look at these targeted engagement or outreach meetings that we listed here, these kind of top 5, are there any others that might fit better or that we would feel comfortable saying, you know what, let's do some really good outreach to get them to fill out the survey?
Well, I think for parents, it's going to be a combination of both. But I think that traditionally we get pretty good response from our more affluent English-speaking families through a survey. So, you know, again, let's go with what we know. And
yeah, so if we took off, I mean, you know, part of this is let's take things off the list. If we took off that list of parents because we felt like between the community meetings and the survey, it's covered, can we take one off?
Right. I mean, I'm really trying to think through, Dwana, because I was with you in virtual, but then it's also a little like just, maybe I would just do the survey. Like, would I want to sit there and listen to everyone share their feedback? I don't know. I could just answer the questions on the survey and be done with it and not So I don't know if you really contribute.
Yeah. No, I think if we take the targeted approach to the surveys, I think here's the deal. We know we've got a ton of meetings we're gonna have to get done here. So if we can shave off as much as possible and focus on the surveys, I think that's the great place to go. But I think knowing too with staff, you're gonna get staff who are gonna fill out surveys. You have staff that are gonna show up in person. So being mindful of that, that's where you're gonna reach both of them. We know with students, we're gonna go directly to them. We don't have to worry about probably surveys with them because they're going to come to us, but you could put out surveys as well. So I think being mindful of like, where we're going with this, but I do agree the business community, a survey is probably better fit. I would say with the DMPS community partners, just scheduling one meeting or something with Vanessa and showing up in that space, you'll get a ton of people there. And so I think being mindful of like, where can we go where we know we're going to get the biggest bang for our buck instead of going multiple places. I think with the partners, scheduling one meeting there, thinking about our high school or our students approach. Are we going to go to each high school? Then we know that's there. Or are we just going to say, nope, we're going to pick one central location and we're going to expect to reach our student population that way and hope they fill out surveys. So I think that's kind of this back and forth of where we're going right now.
So
Well, and I
Sorry,
just
go ahead.
want to interject too, like the survey is going to be open for everyone. It's not like we're specific, we're going to send it
Right.
broad, wide through our comms team, through everything. So it is not exclusive to anybody, but rather it is for everyone. And so, and maybe that even becomes that prioritization if we want to collect the demographic information to kind of help us identify who we're reaching and who we're not, then that helps to kind of throughout the plan or the 4 or 5 weeks, whatever we've got, to really bolster efforts to say we've got to really do some targeted engagement opportunities and or outreach with certain groups of folks.
from
voices.
students, I felt like I heard consensus, at least, I don't know, Kim or Kelly, if you want to nod your heads. Was there some sense that trying to do something in each high school during the day was important for student voice? I don't know if people want to nod or head shake.
I think it's important. I think, though, that we could easily get overwhelmed if it was sort of an all call for students to show up. So how do we create a space that allows us to get a diversity of student opinions within a building without just opening it up for any and all to show up? And then we've got a management issue when we're trying to get through the questions. So if I
Yeah.
recall correctly, we really asked the building
We did.
administrators to identify either a class or a time,
We did,
and
yeah.
we allowed them to direct us. But I think we need to provide some parameters to them around diversity of student opinion and how that is manifested in the students that are invited to participate.
I like the idea of going out to the high schools. However, I am not in support of taking instructional time away to do this.
Okay.
Well, then we might want to consider doing something during their, I still call it study hall. I know that's not what it is called now, but we might consider doing something during their study hall time or something like that where it doesn't impact like a science class or whatever other classes they're taking.
Lunches, yeah, that
Yeah,
sort of
that
thing.
might be the appropriate time to do something if we're going to take that approach. Yeah, or during lunch.
Yeah, feed them.
Mm-hmm.
Or during government class, which is, this would be a good example of civic.
We could make a
engagement.
connection. Yes, we could.
Okay, great feedback. So I'm going to work backwards if that's okay, because what I'm looking for is, are there things we're okay taking off the list, right? So we took off parents because they're represented in lots of other places. Neighborhood associations, if we send the survey to, our city council members, I think would help us. If we send it to neighborhood associations, ask them to send it in their newsletter, is that sufficient? Okay, so that's good feedback. Faith community, my sense is that feels very much relationship, in person. What do other people
Yeah. It might be helpful for us to figure out groups of faith leaders that are already meeting. So the Pastors and Ministers Alliance, I think they still exist. So if there are groupings of pastors that have a pre-existing meeting that we show up for, that feels like a sweet spot.
Well, I think that was on your.
Yeah, that was on my list. And I think too, with that approach, then they can kind of disseminate that out to their congregations. And rather it's we have a QR code or however that, or the link for people, then I think that might be an opportunity to kind of say, this is what we're doing. And then asking them to, if we can get as many people to kind of get this out for us, but going and making that meeting a priority, I think that will be a great approach to.
Can I
to the
clarify, are we trying to get voices of faith leaders or are we trying to get members of the congregation?
Both. So I
Both.
would say so for example, you go to a Black Ministerial Alliance meeting and you're telling them what we're doing, but the ask is that we're asking them to go back to their congregations and share this information. Yeah, so I think if I'm understanding, if I'm not, correct me, but would you be doing the script with them? Yes, but then making the ask, I think, still to send that information out to their congregations.
So I guess when I answered this question, because I did mention some faith-based organizations, it was more of talking to the congregation. When I was answering this, I was not thinking of asking faith leaders. I was thinking that's a source to get to people, to get their feedback. So just to clarify, that was kind of my mindset in answering this question.
Kelly or Kim, did either of you have a interpretation? I think whatever right at the end of the day, I think this is where the board members get to decide if it's important to get that perspective and buy-in. So whether it's the Pastors and Ministers Alliance,
Maybe we do utilize them as the means for pushing out the survey to their congregation and asking them to participate as well. So it's just a matter of getting them a QR code that they post in their Sunday bulletin.
what's nice about that is I think, I didn't even write it on here. I'm not sure if somebody else did, but I think about Amos. I think about the church, the St. Anthony's Catholic Church. Like those are all vehicles that can help push out the QR code. And I think achieve what was trying to be stressed, which is we want our faith leaders involved and connected to DMPS.
Yeah, and I think it adds credibility too, as well.
Okay, so then we talked about business. Parents with kids with special needs, this is a pretty small community, but probably one that is important. So I'm not sure if we have two board members that are willing to step up and do that board meeting, I think that meeting will leave it on. So going back to that main page, page 2, the organization hosted meetings, do we want to do all of those? And if we do, that's great. So look at really this whole page and start thinking, are we doing too many all community meetings in the public schools? Can some of our language needs be met better in the organization hosted meetings? And really we should be looking to cut a few. I think that would be helpful if we're trying to stay within our capacity to actually pull this off.
Okay,
I'm not quite ready to cut any right now. I mean, I think that what we would say is let's lay it all out on the table. And if we have board members sign up, that if we've got 2 sign up, then great. Like I'm not at a point of saying I just want to limit to so many, but rather allow ourselves the opportunity to hear from all voices. But knowing that if we don't have 2 board members sign up for a certain event or a certain meeting, we don't have 2 board members and then that gets rolled into another meeting or that just somehow doesn't happen.
Kelly, can I clarify? Because I think when we talked about it, you used words that really spoke to me. Ideally, what we'd like to do is give a tier 1 recommendation, and tier 1's the kind of the must. And tier 2, right? These are the tier 1 is what everybody said we really needed to do. Tier 2 are the ones that we're saying, let's cut, right, Kelly? And if there's still if there's board interest in it, we can do it, but we've really got to accomplish tier 1. Is that Is that fair using your tier 1, tier 2 language, Kelly?
Yeah, and so why I used that language was based on, I plugged everything that folks said into an Excel spreadsheet and then was able to pull together where the commonalities were. And so I was able to break it down kind of tier 1, where we got most, board members saying these organizations or groups. Tier 2 was kind of next in line. And then tier 1 was, they were only said one time in the information we got back from you guys. So I felt like that was kind of that tier 3. So obviously the organizations that were listed up top were higher priority based on just the responses that we got. Tier 2 is kind of that middle level. 3 was important, but we only heard from one person. So that becomes kind of that threshold by which we say, okay, here's where the interests lie. And I shouldn't say interest, but where folks really identified, our board members identified where we could take the show on the road and or invite, people in to have those meetings with us. And so let's kind of figure this out. And so I still think of it as, we use that as the framework. And then when we don't, I don't know that we'd open it up for a full list. It's quite lengthy. It's probably 80, I think 70 or 80 lines long. But how do we, knowing that that's a lot of meetings to do, but then making sure that where's within the top tiers, where's that interest and where do we have the commitment? The coverage, I should say, not the commitment, but the coverage from board members to be able to take lead in those meetings.
So what it looks
I-
like to me, oh, Kim, go ahead.
Thanks, Donna. I agree with Kelly in the respect. I don't think that we should remove anything from the list at this point. I think that we should use the method of, if we sign up, it's essentially us committing to that session or committing to making that happen. And it's essentially a way in which we as a board can prioritize those groups. No group will be left out. If any group only has one member of the board sign up, then they are included in in an invitation process to another, a meeting in which 2 board members have already signed up. So we're not eliminating anyone from being considered.
It almost seems to me, though, as we're going through this, I feel like the list is kind of created because you've got 5 meetings for the community-based engagement locations, which I think we seem to agree upon. You've got 7 meetings, well, maybe 8 now, because if we're going to do parents with special needs, those would be your all community meetings. You would have 5 meetings if we're going to still entertain the high schools. And then we're looking like surveys, we're saying we'll go out to the business community. They're going to go out to everyone anyway. It kind of feels like we have kind of our groupings of what those meetings will be. If that was the case, those are about 18 meetings that we would be committing to. So I kind of feel like you guys have the framework there, and I think we've got it. And I think the next piece is getting those surveys out to everyone. But I feel like we have the basis of where we would have those meetings set. If I'm reading everything we
I
have here
think you're
correct.
right, give or take.
Yeah.
I think, go ahead.
Oh, I was just going to lift up, in your packet of materials, there is a link to a Google Doc that will show you the outcomes of the input from all of you, that shows kind of that level, whereas, as I talked about, tier 1, 2, 3, where that falls. And so that's what I consider, that becomes a living doc that we can then use amongst ourselves to fill in the information for the date, time, but more importantly, who's signing up to be able to attend whichever meetings based on schedules.
So I think in terms of a next step, I feel like we're close. Like, I think everybody gave really good feedback. I think we're really close. It seems to me like the thing we have to work the hardest on is the interpretation and language and overlaying that with the existing meetings. Next steps include the following. I think everybody's got to just off the bat block October 31st through December 5th. And we are going to have a transition meeting at some point with Rosie in the next couple of days to talk about the logistics, because this will take staff to set up the in-building meetings. And it's also going to take every member of the board. So don't be surprised, because everybody will probably get assigned a small job to make this easier for all of us. But I think the starting point is to look at your calendar and start holding. So look at your calendar and figure out what are nights that you just can't do anything, because we're going to have to figure out how to work with Rosie. It's going to be a logistical process that's going to take some back and forth. Rosie has also, I think with Phil and others, started to put together a list of existing events. So in the happenstance that there's a parent teacher or community night happening in a building, that's helpful for us to know, so we can either avoid it or decide we actually want to work around it and use that as a built-in audience. So our next step is to, as a committee, bring this back together and then sit with Rosie and talk about implementation. If there are specific meetings, so Duana, I'm going to use the example of well, actually, I'm not going to use that example because it doesn't exist anymore. If there are examples of existing meetings that you have identified as a forum to get public input, other than the community partners meeting, and you have a date and you have a time and you have a location and you want it on the list to be considered for board members to sign up, can you please send it? Let's just have you send it to me for now. So again, if there's an existing meeting where you want to do public input and it's got a time, a date, and a place, send it to us, because we'll put it on the list for date selection. I think we're going to stop there. Our hope is that with Rosie, we're going to start working on execution. A good example of where we may turn to you is to ask you to help us with Oak Ridge, or to ask you to help us with Urban Dreams or Conmigo, right? So the first step is reaching out, ideally from somebody on the school board, and asking them if they're open to the idea, figuring out who the point of contact is, so we can make this easier for the scheduling. Rosie, we're going to ask to do the school buildings. That makes sense. And we're going to enlist Phil's help with virtual and links and things of that nature. So really the next big hurdle is all of the logistics that go into the feedback process. Kelly, Maria, things that you want to say before we wrap up?
We have a lot of work to do. I'm looking forward to meeting with BFLs and hopefully getting better insight, some ideas on language and just how we can effectively get feedback from families. So we'll see. Report back. We'll report back.
May I make
I
a small, oh, go ahead, Jenna.
I was just gonna ask a quick question, I guess maybe Kim or Kelly or Terry, who you've been through this before. How many families do you think show up to these things? It just depends. I mean, or is there an ideal number for facilitation? Maybe other thoughts to
On the
consider.
upper end,
I don't
as
know that I
opposed to
want
the
to go
lower.
around an auditorium, you know? So I don't know. I think there's a sweet spot to get the right feedback. It's going to be quality. I think in these conversations, it's quality over quantity. I think the survey is definitely quantity, right? And it's just being thoughtful of that.
My sense is they worked very hard on the community conversations outreach and might have been a little bit disappointed with turnout for the level of work that was put in. But in each of those, I'm trying to remember, was Hoover, that probably was the most well attended, maybe? I'm trying to remember. East. So
that was a full crew. That, I mean, we're talking about two of us.
I know.
So
Yeah,
just being mindful of.
yeah.
No
Kim or Kelly, I think somebody going to say something?
Yes, I was just going to offer a recommendation. recognizing how much information needs to be collected for the outreach portion of this. Kelly, could we take that spreadsheet and add some columns that include a contact person, an email column, a meeting date column, and then can we all commit to filling it out in a shared spreadsheet rather than it sounds.
Yeah, I think that's the
yeah.
plan. And I don't think there's many standalone meetings. I think there's one or two. And so I was just trying to get that. But I think Kelly's plan is once we actually get this in 2 tiers and we lay out the meetings, then the Google Doc is how people are going to sign up and is going to be our, yeah.
Yeah, if I was gonna say, if you, and I don't know if you had taken a look at the link, but there is a date column, a time column, the board member 1, 2, and at the end of it, there's contact, it should be contact name and then email. So that is, I probably should put location in there too. But yes, so that all that information becomes the living doc, that it can just all be gathered and collected there so that we have it.
So just to wrap up, I think because we don't have another meeting, I think there's going to be homework this week around expressing interest. So it's going to evolve depending upon how far we get, whether we're asking you to just say, I'm interested in doing the meeting at East, or we have dates for you to actually pick. So just bear with us as we navigate through the logistics, but assume that you'll be needing to pull out your calendars and express interest between this week and we're not meeting next week. So some of this is going to have to be done by email. And I also think we're really going to need to talk to Phil because not everything's going to be locked in at exactly the same time. So we may have to do a couple of press announcements or however it is that we're rolling out information if we want to start, operating on a rolling basis as we're getting things set up.
Shout out to Maria, Kelly, and Jackie for doing all this work. So that you guys did a lot. Thank you.
Appreciate it.
Just another observation, and maybe Phil can help us facilitate this, but is there a way that we could, once the survey is live, utilize, like billboards, maybe talk to DART about putting the QR code on the side of the DART bus? I mean, just trying to figure out ways that we just sort of maximize getting the word out about getting feedback. Because I really believe, to your point, while quality is important, I'm going to tell you now that there are going to be people that will show up at these, but the preponderance of information we're going to get is through that survey. So the better we can be at pushing that survey out and utilizing that, it may not be the same type of qualitative information that we're interested in getting, but we're going to get good stuff on that survey. So we really have to be thoughtful about ways that we push that out. And while we're going to invest a lot in these meetings, I think that we need to lower our expectations and be realistic that whatever we get is what we get, and it's still important and honest and really critical feedback. Yep. So. Okay.
Good.
All right. So in 10 minutes or less, because we're going to be out of here by 8 o'clock. And thank you, Jackie and Kelly and Maria, for all of your heavy lifting on that. Really appreciate it. So while we were sitting here, I've already made a couple of edits to the RFP. So it's really not content, it's really how it's aligned. So as I indicated, the very first part is really background, really just sharing general information about our district, who we are, who we serve, the kinds and types of educational programming that we have, and then focused, of course, on our student outcomes focused work, including information on goals and guardrails without delineating them specifically. Rosie will be the point of contact for the submission of the proposals. And right now we have slated, if we're able to get everything buttoned up and out, Friday, November 11th as the deadline for getting proposals back. If you go to page 3, this is where I've made an edit. So I thought that the purpose of the RFP was really that very first sentence. This RFP seeks replies from experienced and qualified search consultants or law firms, sorry, page 2, specializing in assisting with employment searches for administrators of large urban school districts, period. That's the purpose of the RFP. Then Section 3, scope of work. Respondents to this RFP should at a minimum provide the following. So Section 3 is scope of work and starts with that second paragraph that was originally part of Section 2. And then moving on to page 3, proposals should include 3 references, including their contact information, details on their history, blah, blah, blah. And I also included something because people could give us volumes. And I thought that we needed to do a page limit to really get them to focus. So a 10-page limit, not including resumes, bios, or CVs of team members. I'm going to go back to page 2 because there were a couple of things that we included here that I wanted to call to everyone's attention. We are very interested in their provision of examples of experience in districts of comparable size and demographic makeup, placing urban superintendents, track record of searches for educational leaders, identifying candidates who have demonstrated experience providing student outcomes and closing opportunity gaps for students of color, English language learners, et cetera. We also thought that it was important that we lift up and ask them to be very specific about their ability to recruit from not only a diverse pool of candidates, but also individuals who have the capacity to tackle the issues of our district. So those are sort of the 2 nuanced things that we included because I think likely we will get proposals from folks who have done searches in small rural communities, but what we're looking for is really people who have the capacity to not only provide information on searches that are comparable to the one that we will undertake, but also in urban settings, which I think is a sort of a different nuance. And then Section 4 is really the interview process. We had suggested that we would be doing interviews possibly that week after Thanksgiving. I guess at this point, we want to put that out there so that we consider that in the scheduling of the outreach and engagement sessions, community meetings. I anticipate that that would be probably, I think we said maybe 3, no more than 5 proposals that we would consider interviewing, or proposers that we would consider interviewing. So we likely could maybe knock those out in one day. I think we agreed that those could be virtual so that we didn't require people to fly in for those. And we thought that that would be sufficient. That we wanted to obviously reserve the right to reject any and all proposals, that communications would be directed through the school board chair or his or her designee, that we would have the general contractor agreement subject to review by our general counsel and then a vote by the majority of the board. And then finally, questions regarding the RFP be directed to Rosie. So I know I went through that really quickly, but what I'd like to suggest is that after you've had a chance to review this, and I'm going to actually go in, make a couple of the adjustments that I've already shared, send that back out to you. But if you have comments, I'd like to get those back no later than the end of the week and share those out with the rest of the board. And if we can agree to form, get this out on the street and get moving.
Can I ask one small question about the collision course of timing to get all this done? Could a committee run the interview process?
We could.
And is that something that there would be, I mean, like interviews could be recorded if somebody wanted to see it. A committee could make a recommendation. They still have access to the RFPs. I'm just wondering if there's openness to that process as opposed to having all board members. But I defer to that group.
I think it's our process and we can determine, how we'd like to proceed. We can do it with a small subset of 3, members, or we could do it as a body of the whole. So preference?
I don't know. I hadn't thought about it. Do we need to decide in the,
No, I don't think we have to
I would
decide
s-
immediately, but I think that, we likely need to decide what that process looks like so that individuals, whether it's all of us or some of us, can plan
I
accordingly.
guess I would think I would take a pulse of the board then to see, do you want to be at that table or do you not feel like everyone needs to be there? I would defer.
I would
I would-
appreciate everyone's voice.
I'll go ahead and start. And I guess I would have a question, Terry. I know you've done this in the past, whether or not historically it has been a small committee or a committee of the whole. I sometimes think that if those get set up, it's hard to arrange around everyone's schedules, but I feel like if you say this is the date and the time, as many board members that could make it as possible. I don't want to shut people out if that's been historical, the meeting of the board, the whole.
Yeah, I've only done it one time before and everyone participated in the interviews selecting the consultant. And I think we ended up with maybe 8 to 10 proposals and we interviewed 3. Juana, any thoughts?
I could live in either space, but I think I do see the benefits of just a smaller group just because of the time factor.
Mhm.
I think if that was to be kind of what would shift me, I think when we all trust each other. So I think that's not an issue. So I would be comfortable with a smaller group just for the time piece and kind of the work that's at hand at this moment.
So maybe what we could do, sort of slice it down the middle. Everyone reviews all of the proposals and scores them to get to those that we interview, and then the smaller group interviews. That way, everyone at least has had the benefit of looking at all the proposals, scoring them to get to our top 3 or top 5. And then individuals who are available and can participate are welcome to come, and we just take it from there.
In your experience, was that a divisive? I mean, I'm wondering if it's going to be pretty clear and.
Yeah, I think it'll be pretty clear. There could be a little nuance there. But I think that to the extent the committee feels like it's tight or close, then maybe at that point we indicate that we'd prefer that the, full board sit down with the committee and talk through everything. So Maria, any thoughts?
I think I would value everyone's voice as well. Or as many as we can have at the table.
Jackie?
Terry, in the past, is this something that gets voted on? So are we considering the committee bringing a recommendation and then having a full vote? I'm just
Yeah.
taking into consideration the potentially large price tag that this has associated with it. And
Yeah, so the full board would vote on the final contract with the consultant, so it would be a regularly scheduled agenda item since we're committing district resources. So we would bring the final recommendation back and the full board would vote.
thank you.
I'm going to defer to the committee. I'm going to prioritize outreach and provide input along the way.
I will make sure that I get this revised proposal RFP back out to everyone. If everybody could get back to me by the end of the week, I'll synthesize those edits and/or comments. And if it's something substantive that sort of changes things to some extent, then I'll share that back out with the committee and we'll determine how best to proceed at that point. But I think the goal is to get moving. We do have a pretty robust list of potential respondents that includes folks that have responded to our proposals in the past, as well as a list from the Council of the Great City Schools. So I think we have a pretty good list of folks, and hopefully we'll get some good proposals back. That's all I have. Madam Chair, I'll turn it back to you.
All right, thank you all for your work. I know we still have a ways to go, but really grateful for where we're at this point. And thank you for Terry and committee and all the other committees that have just kind of come together to get us moving forward in the right direction. So we are done for this evening. You guys enjoy the rest of your evening.
I forgot to thank Jenna and Kim for their extra work on this too.
Yes.
Appreciate you.
Kim and Kelly, enjoy the rest of your time in Orlando.
I'll be back tomorrow night, so I don't have much longer. So,
Okay,
Oh, yeah, she's not staying.
all right. Bye, guys.
see you guys. Bye.